So today we're talking about the inverse trig functions. There's a lot of math mumbo jumbo here to start it out. And the idea is when you graph the sine of x and the arc sine, so that's what we're going to concentrate on. So I'm going to go picture. I know it's not the biggest, but maybe we can. So this is our sine curve. Starts at the midline, goes up to 1. So the sine curve, does that pass the vertical line test?
Yes.
Does it pass the horizontal line test? No. So when we draw the horizontal line, obviously we're going to keep hitting it as we go out to the right several times. And so what that tells you is do not go and look for an inverse function. So technically there's no inverse function for sine. We did not find them. We used them, but we did not find them. So the idea then is if you look at this highlighted section, what we're going to do is restrict the domain, from here to here. So from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, right? That's the only chunk of that sine curve that we're going to use. Now, inside that box looks kind of pink. Does it pass the horizontal line test now? Yeah. So now we can go ahead and find an inverse for that chunk of the graph. So this is now the arc sine graph that we're going to work with. So what does it mean when you find an inverse? The domain becomes the range becomes the domain, right? So remember over here in this pink box, the domain went from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. So the range on the arc sine now is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. On the pink box, the outputs went from negative 1 to 1. And now when you look at the arc sine box, it goes from negative 1 to 1 here on the domain. So whenever you hit your buttons on the calculator and you do an arc sine, where can it produce answers? Where can it produce answers? So where's negative pi over 2 to pi over 2? Whoa, that was good. Those are the outputs. Where is that on the unit circle? Bottom of the unit circle to the top of the unit circle. So if you go from negative 90 to 0 and 0 to 90, what quadrants are we talking about? Got it? Quadrants 1 and 4. Between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. Here would be the cosine graph. Again, you probably can't see it the best. However, this U-shaped graph, they're highlighting this in blue, this chunk. So we tend to use the chunk of the graph closest to the y-axis. So that goes from 0 to pi. So when we do the inverse, we go here to here. So this is 0. Oh, that's a bad graph. Is that what's happening? No. Oh, it is. Thank you. Is it? There it is. Don't tell me to bring it to the front. I know to bring it. All right. So, arc cosines, where are their outputs? From 0 up to pi. So where's that on the unit circle? 0 to 180 is the top part of the unit circle, so quadrants 1 and 2. And then when you look at tangent, Oh, I already brought that other one to the front. That's why. Outputs. So when you look at the tangent function, the original tangent over here, you have a bunch of these S-shaped curves. So we're picking the one closest to the y-axis. When you reverse it, do the inverse, negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 becomes your output here. You can put any x value you want. The domain goes on forever now. But it's also between negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, so just like sine, correct? So those are the outputs. Hopefully you copied some of those graphs down while we were doing it. Just kidding, you don't need
So we're just skipping the first page?
The first page tells you how to do it on your calculator. You do not need to know the graphs, but this is the stuff you need to know. When we were looking at restricting the domain on the original functions, on the type function, then we switch into the inverse function, and this is the range of values. So range are the output. So when you do an inverse sine, your calculator can only produce answers in between, well, in quadrants 1 and 4. All your answers will be between negative 90 and 90. Cosine is, I'm putting it on this side because it's the only one that's the top half of the unit circle, and then we're back to tangent over there.